The last part of our discussion of Egypt covers Ramses II. Why do I like to show you this pharaoh? I like to show you this pharaoh because I think he's a good conclusion for us. He sort of wraps up the spirit of the new kingdom. As I mentioned, these are very independent pharaohs. They're original pharaohs. They're unusual. And they're also very militaristic. So you see here an image of Ramses II, in his chariot, nose drawn by horses, shooting off the new weaponry that the Hyksos had introduced, like the crossbows, right? So I always think about Ramses as a good conclusion to the spirit of the new kingdom. And he also, to me, symbolizes maybe why Egypt started to decline and why outside groups were able to come in and rule over them. I think they kind of got a little too full of themselves, just like we see with the Persians at the end of Mesopotamia. Because Ramses II, of course, is known as one of the most um, sort of full of himself pharaohs out there. He really aggrandized himself, celebrated himself, and you can see that through like his colossi, these gigantic statues, right, of Ramses II. Notice that between his legs, there's one of his wives. So the hierarchy of scale, he does think a lot of himself. But I think that, his attitude is one where Egypt has started to fold in on itself because you have these people who think so largely, they maybe don't see the small people around them or understand the problems, right, that common Egyptians might be facing. Ramses II was also interesting because he was one of the longest lived pharaohs. He's actually considered one of the longest lived rulers in history. In Art History 1, Ramses II is the winner of like the longest rule, and then in Art History 2, you have Louis the 14th. They both ruled, we estimate, around like 70 some years, based on estimations. So they were very, very long lived. In the case of Ramses II, the lifespan of most Egyptians was around 30 years old, 35 years old. And he lived to like, his 80s. So he basically lapped a lot of his children as far as, them dying before him. So I'm sure there was a lot of sons who were like, "Yay, I'm gonna be pharaoh. Oh, never mind. I'm gonna die before dad." That kind of thing. So he just lived for a very long time. It's estimated that he had like somewhere between like 400 and 500 children. So many people in Egypt will still say they're descended from the line of Ramses II, and it's kind of like a bragging right kind of thing. So he was larger than life, and you'll note when he makes his art pieces, they're larger than life as well. Probably the most famous, of course, is his temple at Abu Simbel, and it's known for the four colossi outside, and then in the middle you have actually the sun god Ra. So think about the fact that he's representing himself larger than a god. It's like, oh my, right? And you'll notice his queens and the children again arrayed between his legs, showing you the hierarchy of scale was very extreme with somebody like Ramses II. One of the coolest things about Ramses' temple is that his temple and also the temple of his queen Nefertari, they had to be relocated in the 70s during during the construction of the Aswan Dam. So when the Aswan Dam was being built in Egypt, they knew this region was going to be flooded once the dam was completed and put into service. So they had to literally cut apart the temple. You'll notice piece by piece. It's like a giant jigsaw puzzle, and then move it to the different location. This is just astounding even to consider. But if you go to Abu Simbel today, it has been relocated a little further up, right, where it's out of the line of the lake. So again, it's just really interesting to consider the links we'll go to preserve these antiquities, and it's well worth it. But it's pretty amazing to even consider. So as I mentioned, towards the end of the New Kingdom, of course, you get this decline, and then outside leaderships come in, and that we weren't going to talk about those leaderships. So this essentially is where I leave you with Egypt, and I hope you enjoyed your journey. I think it's a really fascinating culture.